Est-ce que je peux inviter tout le monde?
Could I ask everybody to take their seats, please, so that we can get going again?
Qui est last but not least, parce on a une série de...
We have a number of very interesting speakers for our last panel. Mr. Verlezen, the chair or the director for resources, who's going to moderate the panel. A couple of housekeeping points. Firstly, you're all encouraged to fill in the evaluation form that you'll have found in your info packs. I understand it's the last page in that information pack. Please give it back to us before you leave town. This is the first time we've organised the Translating Europe Forum. It will be very useful and helpful for us to get your comments, assessments, suggestions and ideas. So please fill that in. And hopefully we can improve on what we've done this year for next year. Kim suggests I show you the form. That's always more helpful. So there we go. It's that form there, if you can see it. And you can give it to somebody from the team or leave it on the table in front of you and we'll gather it up there. And a second housekeeping point, equally important. You'll all have received this folder. One of the participants earlier, Ms. Katuna Beridze, accidentally left this on a table where you had your coffee break. It was closed and someone took it accidentally. Her mobile was in her folder. So if you wouldn't mind, open your folder and see whether you accidentally took the wrong folder up. As you can understand, it's a bit of a pain to lose your mobile. We've looked everywhere. We haven't managed to find it. So probably somebody accidentally took it and was closed thinking it was theirs. If you wouldn't mind doing that now, if you come across the file, tell us. Ms. Beritze would be relieved, because otherwise she'll have a very bad souvenir of her trip to the forum, and that's certainly not what we'd like to leave her with as a memory. And another housekeeping point. If you need a certificate of attendance, you can get that from the registration desk at the entrance to the room where you signed in this morning. So that's it for the housekeeping points, and I'll give the floor to Pete now. The assessment form. Please fill it in, but it's the left-hand column that you need to fill in. And welcome back to this afternoon's second panel. I'm delighted to see so many in the room. I've heard that after the lunch you should never have presentations because people will nod off, but I was looking around earlier and nobody nodded off. I wondered why. And Pinocchio said, well, we gave out billions of euro in potential projects. So everybody was very attentive. And now I meant to make you do a bit of the work. Let's see if we manage that. I'm not going to be trying to do that by myself. It'll be myself on the panel, who I'll ask to introduce themselves in a moment. In all of the conferences that we organise, and I've been attending conferences over the last few years, and I hear the same message. Europe's unique chance in the area of multilingualism, the potential of the multilingual market, the priorities of the EU Commission, be it the Barroso Commission or the new Commission. Jobs and growth. Given that, this panel is hoping to give some pointers on how to bridge the skill gap on skills and occupations. 37 years ago, when I graduated with 2 masters, I was going around to companies and they were saying, well, you don't know anything, you're lacking X, Y, and Z. 37 years later, we continue to discuss the skills gap. So there's nothing new in this world. But the situation is a little bit more pressing than it was in 1977, when we heard about 34 million unemployed in Europe and 1 million unfilled jobs in the IT sector. This problem has always been with us, but it's getting worse. A colleague told me, you need to put the question to DG Employment, what have you been doing? We'll help them then with the eminent members of this afternoon's panel. Ramon Garrido, to my right. Alexandra Krause, to my right. Ivor Fogarty, to my left. Françoise Bajon and Johan Hagman. I'll start from right to left. Alexandra, in 1 minute, can you tell the colleagues in the room what we can expect from you or your experience? I've been asked to speak German. Happy to do that. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm from the University of Vienna. I head up the study program, or study director, in other words. So for some 30 years, I've been teaching translation and masters in particular. I've got a lot of experience with program design, curricula. I was in the curricular committee of the Senate of the University of Vienna. I'm also involved in Transcert projects. I think that's one of the most important Commission projects in conjunction with the current panel topic, Bridging the Skills Gap, and hopefully I can feed in my experience into this afternoon's debate.
Thank you, Alexandra. You have understood that she represents the university world here, the academic world, and Ramon.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the organizers for having invited me. My name is Ramon Garrido. I work for the Spanish Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Cooperation in the translation service of the ministry. My background is legal, but I've always been involved in the translation field. First as a translator here in Brussels for the European Commission, and then full-time teacher, lecturer in Spain, and then back to the translation front in the Spanish Foreign Affairs Minister. But I still work part-time as a teacher, as a lecturer in the Universidad de Alcalá de Henares, and which is one of the members of the EMT. So I have both the experience of working in the public services translation field and in the teaching field. Thank you.
Thank you, Ramon. As the best representative of public administration with some academic background, clearly, Ivor, representing Translators Associations.
Thank you. I'm Ivor Fogarty. I'm here representing the International Federation of Translators, their European Centre. We have around 45 associations. That makes well over 30,000 translators. That's, in terms of cloud, that's a cumulus that goes all the way from stratocumulus up to altocumulus. That's a lot of headache. On this panel and on Lindweb, I represent the practitioners. I am a practitioner. I've done a lot of different kinds of work, and translation has been the bread earner. We have many differences here in this room, but for all of us, translation is our business. I'm delighted to be able to discuss the gap with you. The gap has always been with us, but apparently we have to change the wrong kind of translator into the right kind of translator by addressing the skills gap. Thank you.
Thank you, Ivor. So, translators representation. Let me jump to industry representation. Françoise.
Hello, my name is Françoise Bajon, and even though I'm French, I'm going to speak in English because I represent here ELIA, which is the European Language Industry Association, and English is the language that we use to communicate in my association. I've had a company, a translation company in France for 25 years, and I was elected president of ELIA 4 years ago. I also belong to the LINWeb, and in a former life, I was a teacher, so that's why I'm also particularly interested by all what surrounds training. Training of translators inside my company, training of translators through gaps that we can build with ELIA. We've got a program starting, and any other kind of initiatives, in particular this one. And as ever said, I think, well, there has always been a skills gap, but it is changing. And it is changing surprisingly, so I will, well, share with you what are our difficulties when we hire translators. Thank you.
Merci, Françoise. And last but not least, Johan, representing, well, he will tell us.
Well, to promote multilingualism, I'll also speak German, like Professor Krause. I worked for the Commission for 7 years, first off as a member of the Cabinet of Commissioner Orban. He was Commissioner for Multilingualism, and I also worked in Benicio Contino's office in DG Translation for 4 years. And now I'm writing my doctorate in Helsingfors, as we call it, in my mother tongue.
Johan, so with the 5 panelists, we are going to have some discussion with you, or you with us. Of course, don't forget Raphael, our field officer in Rome. He will do the reporting of this debate. Okay, so let's go. I would like to start referring to a McKinsey study, and there was somebody here, McKinsey, if I learned correctly this morning, who's saying, okay, I only can give advice that you never asked for, but apparently this was a study commissioned usefully. It's called Employment, Education to Employment, E2E, getting Europe's youth at work, and 24 million unemployed, of which 1/4 young people is a real problem. It's not new. It's for the last decade or then. So in this study, it is mentioned that while there are more and more people looking for work, employers in Europe cannot find the skills they need. One of the reasons is that employers are dissatisfied with applicant skills. 27%, so 1 out of 4 reported that they have left a vacancy open because they could not find anyone with the right skills. The industry. It's a real problem. It's a real problem. Françoise, how could you tell us somewhat? Does this also apply to your business specific? Because McKinsey is generic. This is specific in translation. Do you think that graduates are not ready for work when they leave university? How happy are you with or your organization with what you find on the market? Françoise.
Okay, so this McKinsey survey appeared in late January or February, and I participated in a conference, an LSP conference in Porto shortly after. And so this was all fresh in our minds, and we discussed this, and well, more or less, I must say that we recognized ourselves in the McKinsey survey. Well, so you raised the problem of the inadequacy of training and the jobs which are proposed and that are not filled. I think one issue is that a lot of young people, to speak about our industry, a lot of young people think still that translation is a highly creative job, and that when they arrive in a company or when they set up as a freelance, they are frustrated because it's 8 long hours of work, if not more, when you are a freelance, and with constraints that even if you in the universities have been careful about telling them, well, you know, there are such and such constraints, etc., until they live it in their flesh, they do not realize what it's like. So one recommendation I would make is really that at bachelor's stage, before young people are engaging into a master degree in translation, they visit a freelancer or they visit a translation company. I had this opportunity at the end of last year. I was contacted by a student from university in Lyon telling me, well, could I come in your company and visit you and try to understand the job? And I said, well, I'm sorry, but I cannot receive every single student that comes. I don't have the time, but if you are a group, okay, I can do it. So I finally ended with receiving 17 students, and I had planned for one hour with my staff, and finally they stayed 2 hours. And the result at the end of this visit was that a lot of them told us, well, that's not what we believed. Okay, so basically when they left my company, they had learned hands-on information, and that was really enlightening to them. So that would be a first recommendation. Well, then you may remember, some of you, I spoke at the MT Day 2 years ago, and I reported on a survey that we did at ELIA with the companies of ELIA, and that was emphasizing that 3 main skills were missing: command of native language, sufficient knowledge of foreign languages, source languages, and use of CAD tools. Well, since then, I think from the discussions I have with my colleagues, it is apparent that number 1 is dramatically being, worsens. That is to say, we all see that the young graduates we hire have a weakening command of their native language. Spelling mistakes, grammar mistakes, not speaking of punctuation mistakes, which can be sorted out quite easily. But when you have a student who is graduated from a master degree, and that you find 1 or 2 or 3 mistakes, grammar mistakes, spelling mistakes in each page, how can we cope with that when we have to deliver text to clients that want 0 mistakes? Because when you buy a car, you want it to run smoothly. When you buy a book, you want all the pages. Well, similarly, Well, it happened to me that I bought a book with 2 missing pages. True. And so when you explain to students that, well, they are not allowed to do one single mistake, and that on top of that they have to translate fast, well, they are completely despaired. So I think that, well, from the association that I represent, the message is clear. Now this spelling and grammar command of the native language, for all languages of Europe, is to be addressed seriously. Because if we do not have this basics, how are we going to translate? So this is my very first message.
Thank you, Françoise. Well, I saw 2 messages. There was a reality check first about the profession, and second, indeed, a native language where Twitter apparently is not helping very much. With it. But Ramon, would that be the same for public administration?
Well, yes and no. I mean, first of all, I think I would need to clarify that maybe when we speak about market needs, we would have to know first what market are we talking about. I mean, I'm quite sure that the market in Spain, for example, which is the country I come from, and is the country I know best, is not the same as the market in Germany or France. I suspect there are differences. And because there are differences, one has to take caution before making too categorical statements. In the public sector, I mean, the situation in the Spanish public sector, translation in the public sector is quite chaotic in Spain, because we don't have many translation services in the Spanish civil service. We have a lot of translators who work scattered in different places. We don't know where. We try to find out, but we don't know where. But we only have a few translation services proper. The one I work in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, is one of the oldest and probably the best equipped ones. But there are not many translation services. And when we organize open competitions to become a civil servant, a translator for the civil service, yeah, we find one of the things we find is what Françoise just said. People don't really know how to write in their own language, in their native language. This is something that I suppose that this question should be addressed to the universities. How can someone with spelling mistakes can receive a degree in a university, a master's degree? I find this absolutely unbelievable, but apparently it happens. In Spain it happens, I don't know in other countries. But there's something she has not mentioned. Our main problem is the lack of specialized knowledge. In the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we deal specifically, well, I wouldn't say specifically, but we deal mostly with legal and economic texts, finance texts lately. And when we organize these open competitions, we obviously introduce a translation test with a legal or financial text. And not many people are able to deliver a good translation when it comes to specialized knowledge, legal specialized knowledge or economical specialized knowledge. So yes, in a way, I think the situation is the same, but I'm mostly worried with the lack of specialist knowledge in translators, in would-be translators.
Thank you, Ramon. Obviously, Alexandra feels appealed on this, but just let me quote another finding in this study that says that, and it's about the curse of knowledge. The curse of knowledge, if you know something, then you think that the others also know it. Or that it's easier for the others to know. That's how I interpret it. But in this study, they say that 74% of the education providers, they are confident that their graduates are clearly prepared for work. 74% they say, okay, our graduates are ready. But the employers, they say only 35% are really prepared for. Beautiful, huh? Beautiful perception. Alexandra, how to
Dazu muss man eines sagen.
I think there's one thing that we can say. I think we're all starting from the point that anybody who has a master's is already fit and ready to start work. If you say somebody who's just come out of law school is ready to be a barrister, or somebody who's out of medical school is now, ready to be a top-flight surgeon, those are another question that we could be asking about university education. At the same time, there are obviously shortcomings in some of the courses, and these often because of the systems themselves. Many countries don't really allow qualification tests. That means that anybody who comes to the school and says, I can do languages, I'm going to be a great translator, I'm going to be a great interpreter, it sounds like a great job, we earn a lot of money. That's what people think. That's what we deal with as universities. So we have to take these people on, and then during the course we have to open their eyes. That's definitely something we do have to do. And if I'd like to say a few critical comments as to what Françoise was saying, one of the methods that we can use as service provider is that you look at people as external lecturers who are actually practitioners. In Vienna, for example, we have a percentage of around 40% permanent staff and 60% of practicing translators and interpreters who have their own agencies, their own companies. So people who, within a very short time, on the basis of their own experience, can open the students' eyes and dispel their illusions. So when it comes to the recruitment of staff, you need to strike the right balance between the highly academic personnel that we all need, because without that scientific basis you can't make progress. We need that, but what we also need, and what we definitely need, are the practitioners on the staff. And I think that's where universities and governments and ministries really have to create the right working conditions for that. Many systems try to work only with permanent staff, with these all-exclusive contracts, and they're supposed to try to cover all the bases that way. These are aspects which have to be taken into account. And then there's also the bureaucratic aspect. If you decide to try to adapt to the market by the program of the design, by changing the curricula, that is constant work, and I'm sure that universities are very much interested in adapting their programs to what the market requires, and obviously to react to what the market wants. But there's an inherent problem with that. These things have to be discussed, these things have to be financed, these have to be approval with institutions. You have to have training courses for staff. I have teachers from my generation, and CAT tool for us, or CAT, the whole idea of CAT was a foreign country for us. We had to retrain. Some of us managed it. Some of us required a longer time to catch up. So none of this is easy. So the reaction times compared to the changes in the requirements are too slow. Well, no, we know that. But if you want to have these processes done seriously, then you really have to generate that change. So I think those are the most important input that I can give you. I'm not saying that we're perfect yet in universities, But at the same time, we are very much interested in ensuring that the constructive criticism should be taken on board. Because unless the criticism is really strong, then often in academia we just seem to say, oh, we'll get along fine anyway. Thank you.
Well, that's the kind of intervention I like from the audience. But I mean, we have the MT network, and they have been working and reviewing the competency framework. There has been, was mentioned Qualitra project, who is refining the competency framework for legal translators. Hendrik, you will correct me on that. We have seen the ESCO project, who says, okay, all this competency, we are going to align it at European level to make it multilingual. Now, what is wrong? What is wrong if the academic world says 75% yes, we produce the right people, and the industry says 30% no, or only 30%, they say we get the right people. There must be something wrong somewhere. Yeah? So what is this? And now I call upon the room, on the audience. Some of you have great experience in there, be it academic, be it industry, be it public service. Any comments or questions? Yes, please.
Oui, donc Nicolas Froliger.
Nicolas Froliger from Paris Diderot University. I listened very closely to what was said, and I tend to agree with part of it, but not with all of it. Personally, I can see there's another gap opening up. Not just between the market requirements and the skills which are available, there's a gap also between the existing skills and the levels of pay being offered. This is something we're seeing as trainers. We are seeing that mastery or knowledge of language was something that you got from any kind of university course, not just translating courses. That is now becoming a separate skill. University graduates in any discipline are writing worse and worse in their own language, in a foreign language. And this is true also, unfortunately, for some translators. As a professional translator and as a translator trainer, I think we need to attack these 2 points together. I think the best way to do that is to base ourselves on the EMT, which are based on skills, the European Masters in Translation. There are obviously other projects of certification out there. Personally, I don't place so much store by those, but we do need to think about this kind of issue. Because if we want to have a lively, sustainable translation sector, we need to attract motivated and skilled students. And in order to attract them, the actual job itself doesn't necessarily need to be intellectually satisfying, it also has to be well paid as well. There's a gap then, we're hearing. We aren't recruiting, and the outlook doesn't seem to be very good either. Ladies first, please.
Merci. Barbara Egel from the European Bank, Language Services. I would like to say we should probably not overburden the universities and expect them to produce students that are already completely ready for the profession and all the pressures that it brings. What I can say is that we have very, very good experiences with trainee programs, and I know that the European institutions do the same. And this is something that the public sector can do. We cannot expect translation agencies who are by their nature profit-oriented to really take the time and the effort it needs to show young translators what it's like in the real world. But the public sector can do that, and I can only say that we have not only had a great input in these young translators that came to us, but we have already also benefited from them. So I think that's something that really should be pushed a bit more, trainee programs, funds to do that and give young translators the chance to learn on the job in an institution. If I may also say something about the skills gap, I can just subscribe 100% to the fact that specialization is actually key. In our recruitments, we were extremely surprised to see that even though we got hundreds of applications for jobs, ultimately when we weeded them out through translation tests, there wasn't much left, and we just couldn't understand it. I take Spain as an example. We were saying to ourselves, we can't believe it with the situation, the employment situation in Spain. Why don't we get more quality applicants? And spelling mistakes in CVs, I find that completely unacceptable. And it was there. So specialization is key, specialization in the economics and legal field. And I think that's where the universities can do something. So that's what I tell all our trainees before they leave. Don't just stay a pure translator, specialize in something. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Specialization is key. Of course, the university cannot make experts in every domain, and you pointed rightly to the responsibility of the employer, be it public service or private. Yes, I go the row. Yes, at the end there. Yeah.
Ja,
Now, I think that we need to draw a distinction between professional training and ongoing professional training. Let me start with initial professional training and what Professor Krause was saying. Her department has at least recognized the problem. They said that the reaction time to recognized shortcomings are very long because of the whole institutional process. And I imagine that that's why Vienna University, from time to time, does indeed manage to adapt its curricula to what the market requires. Of course, that also means, unfortunately, that there's many representatives of trainers, institutions or universities who say, no, we don't need to update anything. We don't need to review anything. That's obviously a very bad situation, and that's where we need to do some catching up. But I would like to congratulate all institutions and universities who have recognized that there is a long way to go and that, we do ourselves update our programs and talk to employers. One way out of this dilemma, perhaps, could be if you look at training paths or educational policy, and if you give those paths and the objective of building in practice-oriented courses. If I'm putting together a curriculum and I'm saying the student or the trainee is going to have a practical experience or course of so many months or weeks as part of the course, then as a student or the trainer, I'm faced with the world of work. I have to go out there and I'm dropped into the deep end. I think that would be helpful. Even if you haven't updated your program for 10 years, you could do that. That's the kind of trends which are out there for making sure that these courses are more adapted to what the market needs.
Okay, thank you. I would say, unfortunately or fortunately, those universities who never adapt their program, they are not here. But I hope that they hear us on the internet. Yes, Alexandra.
Darf ich Sie mal fragen?
Can I just ask you which institution you come from and on whose basis you're spoken? You didn't introduce yourself, sir. Yes, I'm sorry. I didn't want to impose myself upon you. I'm actually from the European Commission. but I work in the Department for Vocational Education. We worked together, obviously, with people in further education. Well, let me answer your comments then. I think that EMT does provide a great incentive for revising curricula on a periodic basis. At the last evaluation round, we saw that in my university at least, this quality label will lead to there being to the less innovative institutions being left out. That's one point. The second point I'd like to make is that since the curricula have become skills-oriented, the focus is indeed very much on employability. The point of internships, and something we have to approach quite practically. We have 400 students on our master's program, each of whom have 3 languages. If I force them to take internships, then I would have to find 1,200 internships, including Chinese, Hungarian, Japanese, and that's going to be a resource problem and a logistical problem.
Okay, thank you, Alexandra. Professor from Valladolid, yes. Yeah.
Merci beaucoup, Pete.
Thank you very much, Pete. Now, my comments are directed to Mr. Ramon Garrido. Your concern is the same as mine, and I'm sure it's shared by all of my colleagues. But I don't share your diagnosis, and let me explain why. I think to be accurate, you should say that the problem in Spain is that administrations, let's say the justice system, doesn't require university qualifications. It means students who finish secondary education. The conference of heads of universities and heads of translation departments has sent out an urgent call to Spanish ministries and even to the parliament to change that policy. We are very much concerned by the setting up of, or the implementation of the European Directive of Legal Rights. How can it be that in one country where there are more translation departments than nearly any other country, how is it that we cannot employ graduates, and what you prefer are people who come from secondary school in order to pay them much less? That really is something which is of great concern, first of all. And I'm not making this up. I think you can see in the official journal of the Spanish government, these requests are still being made.
I'm very sorry, but I don't represent the Ministry of Justice, and I don't represent the Spanish courts. I represent the Spanish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. If you want to work in the Spanish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, you have to have a university degree. So I'm sorry, your words were misdirected. I'm not responsible for that. I obviously I share what you just said. I can't understand why the situation is as it is, but at least in the body I work in, we don't share that kind of situation. We ask people to have a university degree. So yes, I agree with you, but I'm sorry, I don't have anything to do with that.
Okay. Oui. Si possible, enfin, justement pour une petite réponse à M. Garrido.
Spain is a great country anyway. So let's.
Microphone for the chair, please. Microphone for Pete.
Teresa Tomaszkiewicz, Uniwersytet Adam Mickiewicz de Poznań.
I'm from Poznan University. I'd like to take the floor and speak on 2 points. We talked about modern society. My department does cooperate very much with the outside world, and the rate of unemployment of our graduates is 0.5%. This is the lowest rate across the whole university. This may not be the case forever, but all major companies are recruiting our graduates, and I'm in contact with our graduates to find out what are their skills and how is it they find jobs immediately. Obviously there's the language skills, that's very important, because Polish is not an international language. The second point is having those skills in several languages, not just having one foreign language. That's the second criteria. The third criteria that we mentioned a moment ago when we said that students don't have enough general knowledge or even specialized knowledge. Well, that kind of knowledge does change from one day to the next. Secondly, in these big companies, my graduates go to very different sectors. We can't predict if it's going to be into accounting or law or business or culture, whatever. So I think that there are two things we need to prepare our students for. First of all, to develop their general intelligence, and secondly, develop their capacities for them to train themselves and to learn things for themselves on a constant basis. If you have those two capacities, then you can get a good job.
Learning to learn. Hein? So, donc ça c'est le.
That's the message then. I'll move across the other side of the room now. Isn't there imbalance here?
Okay, Marcel Taylor, Maastricht School of Translation and Interpreting. We recognize this skills gap, and we took a number of steps to try and solve it. We started already in 1992, and that is by introducing a so-called skills lab. And this is an in-house simulated translation bureau run and managed by fourth-year students. We have a fourth-year training program under the supervision of a lecturer director. And this skills lab is operational for 8 weeks, 5 days a week, yes, and 8 hours a day. And all students are required to take part in this. In addition, we have a so-called professional placement, also compulsory for all students, where they have to spend 8 weeks in a professional translation company. The objectives of the Skills Lab are speed, quality, quantity, professional attitude, documentation, strategies, etc., etc. The next step that we took was that we founded a platform for all the similar translation institutes in the country. And in that platform, we discussed our competencies. My institute based its competencies on EN 150-38, and we had a very close look to EMT competencies, of course. These were sort of the guidelines for this platform, and in this platform then we formulated a national set of competencies. We went on and we founded another platform, the platform with all the stakeholders involved in translation and interpreting in the country, and we discussed our competencies, and they endorsed these competencies as equivalent to their starting competencies. So the gap narrows and narrows. In a next meeting that we will have, we will concentrate on the so-called evaluation or assessment criteria. we realize that these are different in the professional world from the training programs. And this is not surprising, because the two are more or less not separate but different worlds. They have different objectives. If a translator in a translation company makes a mistake, a fatal mistake, then he is simply fired and he tries to find a job elsewhere. When a student makes a mistake, you cannot send him away, because you have to give him a second chance. That's stipulated by law. So that is quite a difficult situation. Now, we try to solve this in the next meeting. We asked all the stakeholders to list their competencies. We, on our part, do the same, and we'll compare them to see where there are similarities and differences, and we try to overcome these. We found this quite productive and effective to such an extent that we can safely say, proven, that 87% of our graduates find a job within 6 months after graduation in translation or interpreting or related areas. And very often students doing this professional placement get a job on the job, really, where they do their placement. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the... I would say the example I was waiting for, in fact, this synergy between the service provider of producing graduates and the client who needs to employ them. So you have it in-house and you do it in that. That's I think an interesting way forward. But Johan, you would like to...
Yes, could you state your name again? I wanted to... You just spoke.
My name is Marcel Thielen.
Oh, what Marcel Thielen said. And they recognized, we also recognized in the Commission that this is the biggest problem after the Euro crisis, the skills gap in different fields. So we also thought, what can we do about it? How can we, if we cannot solve the problem, at least create platforms for solving it? One is, of course, the forum that you are here today. We bring together all the stakeholders. We bring together those who train the translators, the universities. We bring together the private sector, the companies that think that it's not enough. We have a clear skills gap, what was said here before, and the national administrations. But I'm not going to speak about this forum because it's not enough. So because we needed also tailor-made solutions, or like Ermenegildo Segna would say, a misura. So we went a step further, and we created these workshops. And I have, like the Finnish Prime Minister, always 3 points, but I'll be very brief in my 3 points. Why do we have these workshops? Because in many countries you have small markets, so you don't have a strict specialization in technical, literary and legal translators. And you don't have the funding to organize them nationally, regionally, or locally. So the European Commission comes in. That's my first point, the small markets. We have in Estonia, we have in Latvia, we have in Slovenia. We organize them everywhere, and thanks to the Commission we manage to get, and that's my second point, we get, thanks to the field officers, we get contacts to the national, regional and local politicians, and we get the big shots on board because of the Commission name. And my third and last point is that these workshops, like you just mentioned, try to come up with concrete solutions and current topics. So, for instance, our workshop in Slovenia also helps. That was mentioned by the lady from the European Central Bank before. They cannot even write a CV sometimes. We train them to write CV, or in Slovenia they had courses also into how do you make a good CV, how do you prepare for a job interview. For instance, in Estonia, I'll give the floor in a while to Rita Niinistö, our field officer. They also have lawyers present who teach them how to start up your own business, how to become an entrepreneur in the field. And I think that should be enough. We also try to chunk them in with bigger events. We were present at the FIT conference in Berlin. And we, thanks to the organizers, BDU, I know that Cornelia Groothuizen is here today, so thanking her for being next to the coffee and the drinks. We also had the highest number of attendees of any stand in Berlin. But I think if the chairman allows, I would pass the floor briefly to... No, not yet? Okay.
Thank you, Johan. Sorry, we will come back to this because I still want to take two questions or two comments, one from the left and one from the right. So the lady there, yeah, please.
My name is Rita Temmerman. I'm working here in Brussels at Vrije Universiteit, and I have a number of years of experience in the training of translators and interpreters here in Brussels. And I'd like to add to the discussion a particular buzzword, and that is hybridity. What I am experiencing in recent years is that my students are of a hybrid nature, and I wonder whether this may not be part of the explanation for the fact that 75% of the students get a degree, and the market thinks that only about 35 perhaps are ready for the work. What I mean is that several of my students were not born in Belgium, had their education here in Belgium, were trained in the Dutch language in school, never speak a word of Dutch at home, come to university because they are good enough to come to university, and then end up being one of my students, for instance. So what option do I have then? I fail them right away, because what am I doing then? I am not ready for the multicultural, intercultural, multilingual society that I'm living in here in Brussels. You will have noticed in walking the streets here and sitting on the tram that you hear 10 languages everywhere in the streets. Now, these are the students, these are the children of the people who came to my country. I'm in doubt there, and I understand what you mean, and they have a serious skills gap. But the last thing I'd like to say on this is that they have so many skills that I never taught them, but they had them already, and that this is an asset for the society we are living in, and that perhaps we should not forget about that. I don't have any solution to the problem that is raised, but I thought I should add this to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And having better scores in math, so it's diversity, mixity, hybridity, that's what we meant. The last point here.
Thank you very much. I represent here a Vox Translatorum project from Ukraine with my colleague. And actually, I have a question and some information to share as it was requested. So first of all, a couple words about the project itself. It was created a year and a half ago as an initiative of two companies that actually felt the gap we are talking about. We are in both positions. On the one hand, we are university teachers, so we teach some lectures every week. And on the other hand, we represent business. We are the heads of the companies, and that's why being on the two positions, we feel probably with more details the gap. We have brought the booklet, our project's experience and recommendations step by step, what could be done within one country, within 1 year, just to improve the problem somehow. Just some of the steps to start with. We've made an investigation. There were 3 target groups. University teachers, company, private business representatives, and university graduates. We asked about the importance of the competences and what competences are the most important and so on. Just as a joke, it turned out in our case that you were speaking about 75% university teachers considered to be ready and 25% of the business representatives to be ready. In our case, it may turn out that those 25% mentioned by business maybe are those 25% that teachers of the universities consider to be unprepared. Yes, speaking about the other steps and what we've done. Okay, we have the booklet. It may be just everyone who wants can take it in the exhibition hall. Yet the most important thing about the ways out, as we understood it, yes, after the investigation, we've made a series of roundtables all over the country and brought the industry representatives and university teachers together. So the way out, and to start with, is industry. I've made a spelling mistake, but then realized when I was putting it that actually this is maybe a neologism, university plus industry, that may resolve the problem. So, and maybe just one note, that actually all this, if you find proper people, doesn't require much financing. Well, we have the website and something which actually we can fund. But the right people, enthusiasts, especially freelancers who are ready to share experience, and some other companies who are eager to help the industry, make it really inexpensive, and it works.
Thank you for pragmatic industry proposal, Eva. No, I do not want to cut your right of voice, but let's move on, and you will have the opportunity to develop further object. But I hear about okay, the willingness of a university to adapt. Of course, the slowness of the process. Well, 10 years. I mean, that's really very slow to adapt. But was this confirmed? And we have in the panel two people who participated as representative of the Lind Web platform. It's Ivor and Françoise in the evaluation of the applications for DMT, a new network. And could you say something? Is this confirmed, or what were your findings without naming, of course, one or another university?
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to say that at the professional associations, we bridge gaps. That is our job. The gap is there because there are different skills on offer. And we are heartened in what we do by surveys that come out of things like the Confederation of British Industry, where they say that the thing that they look for in new recruits to their business is, first of all, the ability to work as part of a team. And then they start worrying about the skills. They want you to have a character that they can employ and an attitude that they can employ. For many of the different skills, they can help to train you in those, but you have to be able to be trained. Students arrive, as has been very obvious from the EMT process that we went through, they arrive with a complete skill set. And these include, to their great advantage, transferable skills. What are these transferable skills? Well, they are problem solving, organising. You may not always think so, but they can. Working to deadlines, management and leadership. They produce this very often from their voluntary activity. Negotiating. Students are always negotiating. They get quite good at it. Motivating people. They have to motivate their tutors to accept their work. Making decisions, research skills. They can very often plan, arrange events, delegate responsibility, motivate others, attend to visual detail, assess and evaluate work, deal with obstacles and crises. Students are very good at that. Multitask, present written material with or without commas. Present their material orally, also with or without commas. Manage time. They've become very time critical as students. They handle complaints. They conduct research for other people. That's their friends that haven't yet completed their dissertation. They speak a foreign language. And they identify and manage ethical issues. All these things they bring to a job. That they may not know the difference between trados and déjà vu is something they can be taught later. So we must also remember that students come in all ages and they bring all kinds of things to the workforce. To concentrate on young people, we seem to worry about them a lot, but in fact young people have done voluntary service overseas. They have done help in the community. They have done all kinds of things, and the employers should be seeking to make use of that. A graphic designer that I spoke to recently, and we all know about graphic design packages, they change quite rapidly too. And students coming out of graphic design universities have exactly the same problem. And to a person, the graphic designers I spoke to said, all the students have to do is get together 10 of them, pay for a tutor from a machine translation program, a human-aided, a computer-aided program for a couple of days, get their training, go to the job interview. What's the big deal?
That's the big deal.
That's the big deal.
Thank you, Ivor.
Thank you. Bye.
So you develop an answer to a question that was not asked, but it's interesting anyway. So could I come back to the question of your experience with Françoise, where as Lindweb representatives in the evaluation of the EMT applications, you were asked to see how well the students were prepared for the job market. It was one of the evaluation criteria that you were at. So could you give us the findings that you had from it was in February, so it's a long time ago, but okay. Yeah.
Okay. Françoise is allowing me to speak because I have our summary right here. Oh, you see, I was prepared. What we noticed was there was a great variation in the perception of the value and duration of an internship or placement. There was a muddle about those in terms of the credits awarded by the universities all the way across Europe. This did not depend upon the culture of the country in which the universities were situated. The other thing was the usefulness of the employability data that either the Commission, the EMT people, the department itself could rely on. This was a problem because, of course, the further away the student gets from the university, the more difficult it is to conduct the survey. They're not going to speak for a general survey where the university is going to ask them for money or input to their alma mater at the same time. So the response rate was difficult, and the usefulness of the survey was difficult. And this makes it very difficult for the EMT departments to get decent, reliable feedback. At the same time, there was a large reliance on individual alumni to come into the university and help or explain what it was like about. So these things were very difficult for the universities right across Europe, as I say, regardless of the culture they came from. There was also the problem of national legislation. As we heard earlier today, national legislation is a big stumbling block. Some want people to be paid, others don't want people to be paid. Some want insurance, others don't want insurance. Some insist on university insurance, others insist on employers' insurance. So these things make it very difficult to compare and contrast. Is there anything else you want to add, Françoise?
Yes, I'd just like to add that our evaluation concentrated on internship and not anything around curriculum.
Okay, thank you. I would return to intervention asked by Daniel Tudik and company, if I can say, Daniel, because you are three there. I don't know if you want to ask the same question, but please, yes.
Bonjour, Ludovic Pierrat.
Ludovic Pierrat from the Belgian Chamber of Translators. Thank you for having included this item on today's agenda. It's very interesting. I fear, though, that the people who really can change things are not here in the room. It's the political authorities. What I mean by that is in Belgium there's a dialogue between the profession and the universities and real cooperation happening. No problem there. And I think universities across Europe are doing what they can to help students to become fully accomplished professionals. If that's not followed at a political level, we can do what we like, but we'll never win the day. In French-speaking Belgium, to give you an example, our Minister for Higher Education has just moved the bar from 60% to 75%. So a student entering translation could only get a 50% grade in their language, may not pass. You can put all the cooperation you want in place, and I think some are very creative. But when decisions are taken, what can we do? The decisions are taken. And if the political decision makers were here today and heard the reflections of speakers, they may change their direction or their ideas in some areas. Thank you. Well, as a Belgian, perhaps I could speak on this point as well. The message from this type of conference is heard at a political level. There's a change in the College of Commissioners, so I think it's a good time to be getting this message out there. And through the EMT network as well, I think it's a good opportunity. Danielle? Thank you. Well, I don't repeat what Alexandra and others have clearly stated, namely the efforts being undertaken for a number of years now by universities to adapt to the requirements of professionals and the various employment sectors. When I look at the skills of our students nowadays compared to those 15 or 20 years ago, I think they have many skills. Some are linked to changes in technology, of course, but even in the area of languages and their translation competences, personally speaking, I don't think there's been a deterioration. Students trained to a master's level in year 2 in France, because masters are 2 years there, leave college with a very good level. And I think if you're comparing, I don't think there's been a deterioration. Perhaps their mastery of spelling is not as good as their elders, but if you look at their participation in a forum or discussion of other professions, engineers and mathematicians, our students, despite some of their faults, they're better at speaking their mother tongue than the majority of their peers. I won't dwell on that point. And coming back to what Nicola was saying, but the point wasn't taken up. What has changed significantly over the last 20, 15 or 10 years are the market conditions and the expectations from the market, the expectations amongst employers in terms of productivity. 15 years ago, you might ask a professional translator to produce 1,500 or 2,000 words per day. Now, you might ask 2,500 or 3,000 on a daily basis. Now, of course, there are tools available and resources available that a translator didn't have in the past. But in line with the increase in productivity, pay has not followed the same path. A young translator coming out of university after 5 years of studies, which required quite a lot of effort from their part and their family's part, when they're lucky enough to get a contract, an open-ended contract, they might start in France at a regional level, earning 1,300 or 1,400 euro net per month, or 1,500, 1,600 in the Paris region. And that's below the average wage. 15 years ago, with a Master's 2 level, might have been paid 1,800 or 2,000 euro per month. So if we look in purely commercial terms, the quality price offer is much better than it was 10 or 15 years ago. I'm not throwing stones or brickbats at companies. These are market conditions. At the moment, wage levels are very low vis-à-vis qualification levels. I'm not that pessimistic, saying students haven't been trained properly, they're not adapting to what market requires. I think increasingly they are adjusting, but the market changes so quickly and the client requirements are changing or moving in the wrong direction indeed, that the situation is worsening. It's not just in translation. Recently, we saw ads from companies looking for technical revisers. That's someone who has 2 years of higher education, and they had to have a perfect mastery of English and their mother tongue, also skills in the technical specialization field, and all for a wage not much above the minimum wage. I think the demands or requirements out there are completely unrealistic. I'm not saying the translation expectations are unrealistic. It's the market that is looking for this. But in other areas, employers are completely unrealistic in terms of what they want or expect from students. And a final point to conclude. In the past, companies could afford to contribute to training. Nowadays, they can't. They can't. It's unaffordable. They want people that can hit the ground running. And they're becoming increasingly demanding of training institutes who need to produce ready-made, ready-to-operate students. And that's not always possible, impossible indeed at times.
The point about pay also comes up in every conference, as does the skills gap and tools. So we will come back to that, I'm sure. Now, if you'll allow me, I'd like to come back to where I left Johan.
How diversity applies to what we want to stimulate in network. So just...
Yeah, and if I repeat my 3 points, we need the knowledge of the market, we need the contacts to the big shots, and we need concrete and current topics. It was mentioned by several others here as well. And of course, the forum brings everyone together, but to accomplish this, we need what we have in the